It's time for another edition of Saturday with Seniors here on KC 101. Big thank you to our sponsor, Eisenhower's Tioga County Harley-Davidson. It's riding season and needing accessories for your bike? Need new tires, service work done? They can take care of all that for you and more at Eisenhower's Tioga County Harley-Davidson, South Mansfield. Today, our guest, Dr. Bonnie Kyofsky, joining us here. Actually, we're joining her there. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me into your beautiful home here with an amazing view here in, I guess we call this Nelson, right?
We call this Nelson.
So what year were you born?
Oh, I hesitate to say that. Should I tell him? So I was born old enough to know better.
You're going to stay a little anonymous on that.
Don't tell anybody how old you are now.
You just celebrated a birthday, right?
I did, yes indeed, and hundreds of people turned up and they remembered me when. And there were lots of interesting stories that day. And thank goodness we were able to extort some of them.
That's funny.
Well, I taught for many years, and so of course I had a whole lot of people there telling stories about what had happened to them at school and what had not, all the rest, you know. So that was a fun thing to be doing.
So lots of memories came back from everybody sharing stories like that.
Very much so, yes indeed.
Wow. Now you were born, where were you born?
You see that room right there?
Just pointing right down the hallway, yes.
Just down the hallway. I was born in that room.
You were born in that room?
I was. And her father was born 3 years afterwards in the same room.
Uh-huh.
Same bed, as a matter of fact. Anyway, we had an older brother who had been born probably 5 years before I was. And so, anyway, and those were the ones of us in that family. And our father had been born in the same room.
So how many people have been born in this house? I'm losing track. We're up to 4, I think, so far.
There were a lot of them that were born in this house, but most of them didn't survive. It was a long time ago. Plus the fact that it was often in the middle of the winter, and in terms of having the right kind of heat and the kinds of access to food, really, and all the rest made things difficult. And at that time, they were already raising tobacco, and it was one of those situations where, of course, you had to raise all the food that you had at the same time. And you didn't have too much control over when things would be ready to eat and whatever. It was a pretty, I won't say dangerous life, because they worked extremely hard to make sure that things worked as well as they could. But at the same time, it was very demanding in terms of building. And actually, my grandfather got a reputation. He's written up in a couple of the old books that are written out as being the person that knew most about raising tobacco of anybody in this particular region. We're including enormous areas at that time. So anyway, if you go north of here a ways, you'll find in New York State there are quite a lot of tobacco fields. Going south, you find a few.
Tioga still has a couple of old barns from the days of that. So you had a tobacco barn too, a tobacco farm and a barn as well?
We had 3 barns, that is. And it kind of changed over the years, as you would expect, and it would go from one range to the next. And the tobacco farms were down here in the flat, essentially.
Where the lake is now, right? Is that what you're saying?
It is now,
yeah.
Yes, indeed. But generally, it was hand-planted. My parents did it all my lifetime. She had been a farm girl, hadn't known anything about tobacco, but she was a teacher, and so she was hired to move here, ended up being the president of the school board.
So what happened to tobacco farming? Why did it all stop? Why are there no more tobacco farms?
Well, there were various things that went on along the way. If you think about it, we're talking about the first tobacco farms here, and we're talking about barely 800. And at that particular time, of course, there was little control at all on the area. And so it was a very fussy sort of thing to be watching, keeping track of the weather and keeping track of the access of water and things that just around in general was something that was very demanding. and you had to have the right kind of disposition to be both able to do it and inclined to do it. There are people around here that worked for my grandfather just generally. They never had done anything else. Their parents had done it, and they did it, and it was
a tradition. So tell me about school for you. Where'd you go to school?
Look right straight across the way there. The school was right at the very end, this edge of the water.
Of Kyofsky Lake, upstream side of it,
Well, it wasn't
a lake then now, yeah.
Okay. So anyway, yes, and actually the road...
The old road went under. You can see pieces of it there where you used to go.
Well, actually, pretty much, except that it came up rather than going down. It started well up the river here.
How big was the school? How many were in there?
Well, actually, when I was there were usually about maybe 14 or 15 students in one grade. And anyway, we tended to have 6 grades in one school.
This was the Nelson School, elementary school? What did they call it?
This was the Nelson School.
Yep.
And then people would move the next year to Elkland, and they would also come from Lawrenceville. And most of the places along the valleys had that many people in their school. So it really was a very small operation.
Yeah. How busy was the main road through here when you were a kid? How often did you see a car come through? Was it like it is now, or could you play a game in the street and not worry about getting hit?
Well, actually, it was as busy as it is now, just about as busy. Got to be a little busier just simply because...
There's more stuff.
Not more stuff, but also there were things like access to the roads. And, of course, not only the access, but the road itself, how it did move. It depended on where it was coming from and how it was being built. A lot of the roads that we look at as being, well, naturally they came from north to south. Take a look at them further down the river and you find that they are a part of the big rivers along the way. And some of them, of course, were very famous ones as well, that not far here. Oh, maybe.
So tell me about what kids did for fun. Was there a playground? What were some of the fun things that the youth would do then because you didn't have a computer when you were a kid, right? You didn't have a TV when you were a kid.
We could talk and we could tell stories and we could make up lots of things. And we were very lucky because our parents actually, in my case, both of them were pretty well educated. My mother had graduated from Mansfield.
Was she a teacher also?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she taught for many years. I think she was 18 when she was hired as a teacher here.
And where did she teach? Where did your mom teach? Do you know?
Right here.
Right in the same school that you attended?
Well, actually, no. By that time, she had moved various places because she was also going to school at Mansfield during the time when it was available and all. And so she had gotten a couple of degrees. She and a couple of friends from Lawrenceville decided that they needed to get more education than that. And so they moved to New York City area and got degrees at various places there.
What did your father do for work when you were young?
He was born to
farmer.
The folks who had the farm.
His whole life?
That was just the beginning. He was the only child in his family that lived past birth, actually. And they had something like 4 or 5 children that had just simply been dead when they died. And, of course, that was the weather as much as anything. Anyway, but they got enough heat. They built it in the big main room.
Sounds like life was really tough then if there wasn't even enough heat sometimes to keep everybody safe.
It was really horrendous.
In the wintertime, how did you heat the water for a bath? Or did you guys take a bath once a week? Is that how the family did it? That was common then, I think.
I have no idea about that. I never did get to interview any of those people.
So your father being the only surviving child.
Right.
And he was born premature too?
Probably. Although, they didn't know what the numbers
no
were.
Incubators then. It's a different time.
Exactly. Yeah. So what it was a case of they had several babies and both of them were absolutely sure they wanted children. And anyway, it was one of those things where they put a hole in the floor in the living room here. It's still there. And they put a pole through, whatever pole it was. I'm not sure what they had in the stage.
They poked a hole through the floor.
Yeah. Exactly. And had a thing that went through it and brought heat and made a warm thing that was made from coal that they had carried in from up the hill here. And it was pulled into the basement. And then that was where that was just taken care of.
So when you needed extra heat somewhere, you put a hole in the floor because that was the way to do it. Basically made your own homemade incubator.
Mm-hmm. They put the baby with whatever we made warm.
Some sort of material in oil is what they used for your dad to keep him incubated or wrapped in?
Yeah.
And moisture, yeah.
They hired a local woman who was there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there were more than one of them, I think. But it was one of those things where he was considered a miracle baby because everybody was, had been looking for a new baby here for a long time.
Half the babies didn't survive then, right?
No.
Probably?
Oh, no.
In this world? I mean,
In
it was...
fact, I don't know how many did not in this family, except that there were probably at least 7 or 8
Wow.
did not survive. And we've got some pictures, actually, of him with whatever the thing his mother had made that was taking care of him. And he actually survived. People, talked about it considerably. And of course, my grandfather had horses, and there were horse farms around here.
Horses for workhorse type farms. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There weren't a lot of them, but there were enough so that they kind of took care of whatever the need was in this particular area. Anyway, my grandfather had a couple of the horses, and the situation with my dad, he did go to school next door. As it ended up, they built a place that was right next door. There were a couple of times that it caught fire. My mother, she was hired to be the person who was the chief, whatever, in the school. Well, actually, it sounds as though I'm making it up, but she got her degree to be able to teach as the head of the school when she was 16 or 17, whatever it was. She ran that, and it caught fire one day, and it had this bunch of children inside, and so she immediately just had them get up. They were right in the corner of the water over here in any case. And they did have pails because they had to, they brought water in to drink and the whole business. And she just set them up, and they became a
Bucket brigade?
Exactly. And so all the children in the game, now it was on 3 levels, this particular school.
Were all the kids okay? No one got hurt?
Nobody got hurt, no. And it was one of those things where they obeyed when they heard that there was something like that.
They knew they needed help, and people were there to help each other.
Exactly.
So, I was going to ask you, Bonnie, tell me when you were a kid, did you have any hobbies? What did you like to do?
Everybody in my family, of course, were farmers, and so anything that you could do that was of your size, you were involved in the
chores of around the
work.
Yeah. When you were a little kid, how much time did they expect for you to help around the house and around the farm? Hours every day, or?
Everybody helped at whatever needed to be done, very much the way we do now. If you're here during a day, a full day, you would find all of the children involved in something or another. And they're amazingly independent for their ages.
So tell me the flood of 1972. Do you remember that? Tioga was all underwater. Lawrenceville, I don't know what it was like here, but I remember seeing pictures of the devastation in Tioga and Lawrenceville from the flood from Agnes, Hurricane Agnes.
Yes. As a matter of fact, as it happened, it was interesting because it had been a big flood all the way down the
Kyofsky River?
No, it's bigger than the
Tioga River. Corning, Steuben, everything downstream flooded. Terrible in that flood.
Exactly.
After that flood, that's when, at least for the Tioga, that's when they pushed to really put the dam in. Remember when you heard about the dam for Kyofsky Lake and that you were going to be having to have your house moved?
It went for years. It took at least probably 50 years for them to make the decision that they were going to move it. And they were generating for it from down the river and from various places, depending on...
Were people sad when they found out that they were going to lose their home? What was...
People, yes, they were torn apart. The houses where people lived there, they had been building it by their hands themselves, and it was one of those things where it was...
Can't replace that.
Exactly. And it was one of those things where if you tried to replace it, how were you going to be doing all of the building that you needed to be doing to keep your farm going? And so, yes, it was demanding as the dickens. Plus the fact by that time people had established families, and so they had children in school, and kids at that stage tended to have the kind of understanding that their parents had, and they were not educated very highly. And it was one of those things where parents very much wanted their kids to be intelligent and useful.
Educated as much as possible,
But at the same time, it was a difficult time. And there were people that came in that were really enormously helpful, like musicians who were just great and could be teaching kids singing and other kinds of music. There were a few pianos and fiddles and a lot of dancing. People relied on music a whole lot, and many who were very talented musicians.
With this whole move, how did your mom take that? What was her part in this? Did your mom help out with the move or get involved?
Yeah, she ended up fighting it all the way along the way, as my father had. In fact, Dad died right in the middle of when they were making a decision that they were going to start the dams. And he fought it, made trips to Harrisburg. By that time, he was county commissioner, and he was making moves to the south and the north, too, because, of course, the water was going to be coming from the north.
What was your dad's name?
He was Robert Lugg.
He was a commissioner in Tioga County in the 70s then?
Before that.
Yeah, prior to that, this happening.
He was elected in the year that I was born. However, he died
in 54, and that's when Grandma was appointed to the position.
Right.
So your mom was appointed to the position when...
Right. Well, I was telling you that she had gone south to further education, and she'd gotten that in New York City. At the best place in New York City that you get those particular jobs.
So when this came, this house was moved to where I'm sitting when they made the lake. How many other houses there were moved? Do you remember where a lot of the houses in Nelson moved to the new part of? I mean, Nelson. What we know from Nelson now is not what that wasn't there before, right? That's the new Nelson.
Well, it's a lot different now, but at the same time, it's essentially the same place, except that people moved their houses up.
Just up a little higher.
Yes, and if they could. But on the other hand, there's some places that are good for putting a house and some places aren't. And so anyway, they adjusted to whatever there was along the way. And essentially, she said, okay, the government says that they're going to move our houses and towns and all the rest. And how do you feel about that? And what would you do in that particular case? Anyway, she took the best students she had, and she said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to be doing a survey of the town, and you're going to interview people, and you're going to ask them what they would do if they did have to move. Anyway, the kids did a wonderful job, actually. They just simply gave the answer that parents did, and many of them couldn't be repeated, but at the same time, there were many people who were just fighting by it. Yep. There were many people who were saying, well, good, they'll give us a whole lot of money, and then we can move someplace where we can whatever. Well, of course, that was...
Just a dream there. You didn't get rich out of this one.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is anything else you want to share before we leave? Any last things you want to say?
One of them is the fact that this was people's whole lives. Their emotions were all tied up with this. There were some people who did think that they could be rich, but they were the people who thought that they were smarter than anybody else. And of course, they had people coming in here from Washington, and they were a little smarter than most of the people that were here. And so they were dealing with people who had a lot of oomph behind them. And then there were all of the people that you think about who would be involved in all of this. And one of the things that was important about it was the people who were involved. Some of them would have been people who had jobs up and down the valley, and they had their businesses and all the rest.
They were going to be impacted by this and certainly had feelings about it.
Exactly. And some of them were very excited about it because that meant that they'd be bought out and they'd be getting a lot of money. And, and they didn't know what it would mean. They didn't know how big the dam would be. And they didn't know what they could do with what they had. There wasn't anybody who had any money.
Do you think because there wasn't money here, you didn't get treated as fairly?
Well, their job was to buy stuff as cheaply as possible. And that was the way that they were paid by the government. And so the whole thing was that you did not get paid very much for
as little as they could pay you.
Exactly. Yeah, and you had to, if you said that your land was worth a little bit more than somebody else's, you had to prove it. And in which way did you prove it?
If you don't have the money to do that, then
That's right.
Okay.
Not only that, but the whole thing is, you think about people at that stage. You live on the land and on what people have to say. People who are farmers are living the same way. They have to be figuring on how much they can do with how much, and they have to be extremely good calculators, and that's why there would have been 3 or 4 excellent farmers in an area. However, they would have to be dependent on people who were not excellent farmers who would be working for them.
Yeah.
It ended up being a very involved situation. You know, what am I going to do about my whole living that I've had here for 40 years, you know?
Yep.
And everybody had those particular problems.
Very, very interesting. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me into your home and teaching me about Nelson and tobacco farming and your family and how you make your own incubator for your children if you need to in this world. You do what you need to do to survive, and that's what you did, right? You did what you had to do.
Well, I didn't do it. It was 3 generations ahead of me that did, but it was one of those things where...
you were taught well and raised well, it sounds like.
It's true, and I came to the lucky generation where they could take care of babies. My grandmother had been a nurse wife just simply because she had all these sisters who had children, and she had helped deliver the children, and she knew more than anybody else about raising babies, and so it was one of the
stepped in where you were knowledgeable. So
The best story that your mother always laughed about was when your dad was born. He was number 3 in the family. I heard Mom say one day, laughed, and she said that was the first thing I ever knew about him. And Annie's father would have been born, and so it was the first thing you'd heard about him. And Doc Williams said, "Good job, Bob." Says he's got a handle.
I think I know what you mean.
Anyway, things. It was very elemental, and people loved each other. And
happy times. I think we're getting close to running out of time here.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for inviting me into your home. You've been listening to Saturday with Seniors here on KC 101. Thank you to our sponsor. Thank you so much. If you stop in and see Cody and his crew there at Eisenhower's Tioga County Harley-Davidson, give them a big thank you. They do a ton of stuff for the community, including sponsoring Saturday with Seniors here on KC 101. If you know someone who loves Harley-Davidsons and you're trying to figure out what to get for a gift, maybe Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthday, great gift ideas, gift cards, t-shirts, whole bunch of stuff. They got some sales going on. Take advantage of it.